Welcome to the Journaling with PT podcast. I am your host, artist PT Russell. This is a podcast that highlights creative voices and emerging artists from all over the world. If you are a fan of film, enjoy a conversation with special makeup effects artist, Mr. Michael Dinetz. Hello, everyone. My guest today is the very talented special makeup effects artist, Mr. Michael Dinetz. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And have you seen anything interesting on streaming or at the theater lately, Michael?
Oh, have I seen anything interesting? I've been doing a lot of binging. What did I watch recently? It's all so much of a blur. One of the more interesting things I saw recently was Netflix just put out this cool documentary narrated by Patrick Stewart on Neanderthals. That was really interesting. I'm very much behind on a lot of the narrative stuff I have bookmarked. Recent movies I want to see. So I'm dragging on that front. But I keep abreast of things within my own field. Right. One of the things making the rounds right now are images from the new project that just started shooting with Billy Zane, where he's portraying Marlon Brando.
Oh, my goodness. Dead Ringer, eh?
Yes, it's beautiful. The work they did. I mean, I can still see a little of Billy Zane in there, but it's a beautiful makeup.
Yeah, it's
created by some people that I know. Very, very well executed. So I'm curious to learn more about the film. Obviously, Brando was such an intriguing character.
Yes, that was in production, for a while. I saw some write-up on that a few years ago, so it's been a long time coming.
We have. I also know that there was an interesting portrayal of him. I never finished the series, but there was that series with Miles Teller about the making of The Godfather. Forgetting the title, but it was on, I think it was on the Paramount Plus app. And the casting in that was phenomenal. And whoever they got to play Brando was really, really good. But the guy they got to play Coppola was like spot on. And I really should finish that. I can't remember what it was called. It'll come to me later.
Yeah, text it to me when you find out. It sounds very interesting. And I've seen, Apocalypto for this, I think the second or third time, and just watching the masterful cinematography. I never paid much attention to it, just watch it as a whole. And sometimes when you watch again, you see things you missed the first time or the second time.
Absolutely. Any movie like that. The makeups in that were beautiful. Everything about that movie was beautiful. I mean, I know certain inside details, and obviously as a Jewish individual, you try to look past the fact that it's made by Mel Gibson.
Separate the artist from the art type of thing.
I try really hard. Apocalypto was really cool. I knew some people that worked on it. I know their head of makeup was it's a tumultuous relationship. Their head of makeup was married to a good friend of mine for a number of years.
Small world.
But I know that one of the things that we thought was really funny is they needed to create a fake body, I think, for the lead character's kid for one of the scenes, and they couldn't get him in for a life cast. So they had a bunch of photos taken, and that was freehand sculpted from photos, which I always thought was really impressive. Likeness sculpture is probably about the hardest thing out there to do.
Yeah, it was a hard watch because everything looks so real. And
it's very intense.
Oh, very much so. The chase, all of it. I guess your adrenaline going. I guess that's the intent, and which makes it so exciting.
And the brutalism of that culture, I think, also added a lot. And then, of course, you're watching the whole movie with subtitles, and those are always a challenge. You know, I always have to ask myself going into a movie like that, am I prepared to read a whole movie?
And that's why I had it on mute. So I could see the visuals.
No, I have to do it. Like, there's certain movies I'll do dubbed. Like, I'm a huge Hayao Miyazaki fan, so I'll
Right.
watch his
So am
movies dubbed. But like, I just watched that I did watch recently. I just watched Shogun.
Okay.
And that was really, if you haven't seen Shogun yet,
I haven't.
It's amazing. I never saw the original, but it's so well done. It almost makes me not want to watch the original now because I don't know
The
how
costuming is so beautiful.
the costuming, the sets. I mean, I'm sure a sizable amount of that had to be built. I don't think they were using a lot of rented locations.
Yeah.
And just the sheer scope of doing a movie like that is so large.
Yeah. So you mentioned Miyazaki. Miyazaki, what's your favorite Miyazaki film?
I've been asked that a few times. That's a really hard one.
Top 3 then.
Castle in the Sky, Howl's Moving Castle,
of course,
and Spirited Away.
Okay. I'm right there with you with that. Princess Mononoke I would include that for mine, and then Castle in the Sky.
They're also great, like My Neighbor Totoro, and even like Kiki's Delivery Service. I love. So it's a really tough call. I have not yet seen The Boy and the Heron.
Neither have I. I want to.
It's supposed to hit streaming next month.
Yeah, we didn't get it here in Canada in my area, so unfortunately I haven't seen it yet. So what can you do?
I was just lazy getting to the theater.
So which film production, or is there anything particular you're waiting to see a film?
That's hard. I mean, I'm always waiting on whatever the next Marvel movie is. I haven't grown tired of those yet.
A lot of people are complaining about Marvel fatigue and the type of thing. I don't know if it's something real.
Yes, the general audience views it as repetitious, but if you're a huge fan of the Marvel universe, like if you grew up with the comics,
right,
then you're just waiting to see each new story make it to the screen. So for me, I don't think that fatigue exists. I will say I always approach the non-Marvel made Marvel movies with a bit of trepidation. Like, Sony has botched a lot of their Spider-Man movies. I just watched Madam Web the other day, and I have to say I loved it right until the last scene. I feel the last scene was a little kitschy. I did not think I was going to like it. I thought that, it's an origin story, and that character is mainly known when she's older. So trying to picture her as Dakota Johnson was tricky, but it was well done. I liked it. Yeah, I don't really have Marvel fatigue. I feel like DC has dropped the ball on almost all of their movies. I just think they're poorly executed. But I feel like Kevin Feige has done a phenomenal job with Marvel. I have enjoyed every series, every film, some more than others, but like a lot of people complained that the Marvels was like just a giant woke vehicle. Like, I didn't find that at all. I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. There's their share of like right-wing people out there that are just like, everything's woke, and I'm like, I don't have time for that.
So speaking of Marvel, you have contributed to a Marvel film, have you not?
Yes, for all of 2 weeks. Yes, I worked on Infinity War very, very, very briefly, just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit is a lot.
I don't want to claim like, I wasn't running a department or anything. I no illusions. I was a tiny, tiny cog in a giant machine.
Yes, but it was necessary. Your contribution was necessary. It was. Yeah,
sure.
As a component to the whole thing. Pieces of the puzzle, if something's missing, it just, the whole thing is kind of off kilter.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, I was making pieces for reshoots. Everything had already been designed, and they were just doing pickup shots. And it's being able to say you worked on a Marvel movie for a Marvel nerd is just a lot of fun. From the nerd perspective, I sort of wish it was Infinity War, and Endgame and not Infinity War. That's probably my favorite of the films to date after Captain America: First Avenger. I am a diehard Chris Evans as Steve Rogers fan. I get goosebumps every time I watch him on screen in that role, because I just feel like I've never seen such a magical, faithful transformation from page to screen as I have with his performance as Steve Rogers. Like, it's just, he really is like the last Boy Scout. Like, it's just, it's these are the characters that I think are the substance of role models. You know, a guy that just stands up for what he believes and has no quit in him. I think it's who we all aspire to be. I know, Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark has sort of dominated the Marvel universe, but for me, it's Chris Evans. It's Captain America.
That original one was my favorite as well. That and the original Iron Man.
I saw that movie in Hong Kong, the original one. It was when I was over there. That's when it came out. I saw that at a movie theater. What
was that like, that experience in Hong Kong watching?
I love Hong Kong. It's my favorite place on earth. I've been there like 40 times. I was working pretty steadily in mainland China at the time, so I would go down for a lot of quickie trips to Hong Kong. And it was during one of those trips I went down and I made it to the theater. And I vividly remember which theater I saw it at. It's right across from a bookstore I would frequent. Other than having the Chinese subtitles at the bottom, it was like going to see a movie here. I mean, it's, the theater.
Concession stand the same?
I'm a weirdo, and I never get anything at the concession stand. The concession stand is mostly the same, candy and popcorn. In Asia, it's really popular for them to sugar rather than salt the popcorn. But that's more like a mainland Chinese thing. Hong Kong's pretty heavy on the Western influence, I think.
Okay. Oh, good to know. Yeah, so you spearhead a Facebook group for film investing. Is it for film investors or those who are looking for investments and learning more about investments? Tell us more about that.
Everything. I spearhead a bunch of groups. I spearhead a group for film crew people in Los Angeles. I manage at least one special makeup effects group, another crew group, and then I manage 2 groups for film investment. The film investors is the one I put more time into. There's another one that is not as great of a group. But I put a lot of time into that group. I run it. It's not my group. The woman that runs it is just never there. You
did an excellent job running that group. I've learned a lot from you.
I try so hard. I know how much Facebook groups are like the Wild West, and if you are not willing to still instill law and order and parameters, it runs wildly out of control. And then obviously some people don't like that managerial style, and you have to deal with that. So that's its own sort of ball of wax, but it is what it is. The group, there are some people with money in there. I would say it's definitely not a 50-50 split. The majority of people in that group are people looking for money, and the majority of those people are probably not ready for it yet. I would say of the people looking for money, there might be 10% of those might be like what I would call legitimate filmmakers, people that know how to actually make a movie that isn't made for scraps and, on a shoestring budget, that really understand proper production and understand distribution and understand, getting a movie out into the world and all the minutia that goes along with that. And then you get at least 10% of them, although I end up having to delete a lot of these, are people that wrote a self-published book and decided they had to get it out into the world, and it now has to be a movie, and are just literally begging somebody to make their book into a movie. And that is such a headache, because they don't understand what they're asking. And you have to politely explain that that's not how any of this works. Like those old ladies in the the car insurance commercials. I think Progressive Car Insurance, it's these old ladies. Anyway, I digress. That's its own ball of wax. But yeah, that's hard. And then everybody else are people that maybe has some industry exposure, or they're a self-taught filmmaker in a small locale that doesn't really have an industry, and I try to offer guidance. I have a small side business doing film development, which is sort of that early stage process where you take a screenplay and you turn that into an investable entity. If all you have is a screenplay and somebody cuts you a check tomorrow, there's nothing you can do with that check. It puts you in a very bad position. So the idea is that if you properly develop the project, that will put you in a place where you can make a fair presentation and where you can hopefully secure funding and then go out and responsibly make the project. Like, you're ready. You have everything figured out. You've got your plan in place. You've got your key personnel. You've done the work. You've built the foundation. I think one of the biggest problems in independent film is people diving in without that foundation there, and it's why a lot of movies fail.
Yeah.
So I try really hard in that group.
You do a lot, and congratulations to you and everything that you've done.
I spent 20 years, I lovingly tell people that I do development work for. I spent 20 years watching producers screw up. I've had a front row seat to every mistake a producer can make. And as an observant individual and somebody that's built connections with seasoned producers and who has been to the markets and met distributors and heard what everybody wants and learned that side of the industry, learned how to deal with the preliminary budgeting side of the industry, like learning what it takes to pump out a movie and have it stand a chance. I try to pass that along, for a nominal fee because of how time consuming it is. But that's, the goal is to try to change. Right now we have a 90% rate of failure. That's the statistic. That is the success rate of independent film to generate a return. And it doesn't have to be that way. I could talk about this for hours and bore you to tears.
This is good stuff.
It doesn't have to be that way. I think that it's become that way for a handful of reasons. And I think that if people are willing to address those reasons and make positive change, that something will go somewhere. Right. And that's the goal. So that's why I got involved, to try to affect positive change and, see if anything comes of it.
Thank you for that. And about packaging. So I heard that term used many times in terms of you have a screenplay, you have things developing. What's the best approach to before you make the approach?
Packaging typically refers to what happens during development, and there's different levels of it. Usually if somebody talks about packaging a project, they want to tack name talent onto the project, probably a well-established director, ideally a distribution deal. It's that style of packaging. It goes off of a very specific funding model. There are a fair few people that do equity investment in film that expect you to have these assets in place. I'm here to tell you that there is a world in which it puts you at a disadvantage. For instance, doing something like a pay or play deal for an actor means you're going to pay maximum cost for that actor. There's other reasons not to do pay or play deals, but that's a much, much longer conversation. Even if all you have is a letter of intent, if you've managed to secure one without paying for it, the deal negotiated is always going to be top dollar value for whatever actor it is. If you manage to get money without actors attached, when you go to get your actors, you can get them at a discount. And all that's going to do is increase the return on investment. It's going to widen the spread. Distribution, if you cut a distro deal on the front end, the distributor has all the cards. You have no leverage. Hopefully you'll get a decent deal, but you'll never get like an amazing deal unless you have a well-established relationship with that distributor. If you can truly deliver an amazing film, you'll get a good distro deal. And you can potentially have a bidding war. The problem is the marketplace has bred info into a lot of money people that You got to have this stuff first, and it's very counterproductive in my opinion, but you're going to cater to who you're going to cater to. You can also get a movie funded without equity. Like, you can leverage different assets and debt finance a movie, or at least part of it. Some people prefer that. The reality is what you're going to pay back against debt financing on a well-performing movie is going to put more money in the production company's pocket than if you had to pay back an equity investor. The caveat is if the movie fails, you still got to pay it back, unless the terms of your debt financing are very interesting, and sometimes that does happen. At least with an investor, it's not a loan, so if the movie fails, yeah, sucks for the investor. So there's pros and cons on all sides of it. But that's basically what packaging is. It's just tacking stuff onto the movie to make it more attractive.
And so if you have no package, you just have a story or a novel or graphic novel or whatever, and what do you do with that? What's the next step for you for a person
so
who
that's,
only has...
That's where development starts. You need to do a handful of things. This is where I butt heads with certain seasoned producers, because you'll get people that work in the, one to a lot, and their attitude is very much the attitude that Canon Films had in the 80s and 90s, and that is get the money and figure the movie out later, figure the budget out later. And you could do that during the Blockbuster video days. You could put hot garbage on a plate out, and the video stores would buy it, and it was brick and mortar sales, which means you were selling units, and that was great. We don't have that now. So the quality burden for the individual filmmaker that's making one movie a year or one movie every 3 years or whatever is very different than companies like, say, the Asylum that are making 30 movies a year. Like, they can put out hot garbage on a plate and their distributors will buy it because they deliver volume. And that volume has value in the distribution market. You don't get to play by their rules. So if all you have is a screenplay, typically then all you have is a writer and somebody trying to push the project, maybe a director if you're lucky. It's a lot of attaching key personnel. It's a lot of personnel are going to want. It's understanding that development doesn't happen for free, that you cannot make a movie happen out of sheer willpower. You have to be willing to spend some money on certain key things up front. There are going to be some things you just have to drop money on, or they're probably not going to get done unless a miracle befalls you and somebody offers to help, and that person can actually help. And that's very, very rare. 9 times out of 10, or more like 999 times out of 1,000, anybody offering to help you for free can't really help you. They think they can. They're going to try. They're going to give it their best shot. They're going to mean well, and they're going to let you down. Because they're in the same boat you're in. They're at the beginning of their journey, and they're trying, because the people that are further along have figured out that their time has value.
Right.
So they will charge for things.
Well, I hope those are out there who are listening, who want a deal. It's a little bit more to it than just a story. You need some development as well.
The old adage in business, and make no mistake, this is a business.
Yes.
Art is always going to be secondary. If it's not profitable, you will not get somebody to back it. You might as well pay for it yourself. If all you want to make is art, find the money, raise the money yourself out of your savings and make your art. If you use somebody else's money, you need to treat that money with real, genuine respect, which means doing everything that should be done to make that film profitable. And this is really hard for a lot of filmmakers because their artistic motivations come first in many cases, and they have to teach themselves to place those somewhat secondary. They don't have to be a far second place, but they do need to come second to financial responsibility. And that's important. The old adage that you have to spend money to make money is real. You don't necessarily have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, but be prepared to spend some money or nothing is going to happen with your movie. Like, things have to be done. I am a big believer that a preliminary budget should be done, and I do some of that. Figuring out a responsible figure. It's never going to be super tight. Nobody should ever do a super, super, super tight budget, heavily constrained budget before you're funded, because there are things you can't figure out that early. You can't do a locked schedule until you can actually schedule real human actors. You can theorize, but that schedule is going to change. So there are certain things that should have extra padding. There are certain things that should have extra time. But if you don't know how much money to ask for, you will not get money.
Right.
So I think everything should start with budgeting and then progress from there to your various pitch documentation and bringing people on board and so on and so forth. It is very daunting for a lot of people. And that's why people just dive into crowdfunding and take the, $20 or $30 or $40 or $50,000 they can raise by killing themselves doing a crowdfund and try to make their movie happen when they're working off less than 10% of what they need to make the screenplay they wrote. I don't think that's fair to the movie. I think you're doing the story injustice, but that's just me. Again, filmmakers should never be accused by default of being rational, because they're not.
Great information, Michael. Oh my goodness. I hope whoever's listening, you have a notepad and a pen, because this is good stuff. And where can folks find you if they wanted more information or to connect with you for, you said you offer a service for development, film development?
Honestly, you can track me down. I'm Googleable.
Okay.
But find me on Facebook. That's where I meet most people typically. It's my preferred platform. But my website for my effects business is hauntedDreamsStudio.com. All my social media links are on there. My contact info is on there. You can certainly reach out. I will talk to anybody. I don't care what your experience is in the industry. I will talk to you and I will offer what guidance I can. But I will reiterate, if you cannot afford to commission some form of basic services to get this project off the ground in terms of figuring it out and making it presentable, it's not going to get off the ground. Everybody wants to believe that they have the next world-changing project, and it's just going to have everybody from the industry that can help them flocking to them. And they've heard these magical stories about things that have happened, most of which are on studio films, like Eddie Murphy not taking a salary on Dreamgirls. Like, forget all the studio film stuff you've heard. Forget about the success stories with people like Kevin Smith and Robert Rodriguez from the 90s. All of those success stories occurred during a completely different distribution market than we have today. And if you don't understand why that's important, then just take my word for it. The distribution market affects everything. It affects what can and cannot work, and never bank on being the exception as opposed to the rule. Everybody wants to be the exception, but that's playing fast and loose. Don't play fast and loose with somebody else's money, because all you're doing is bullshitting your investor. And that means the worst thing that could happen is for them to give you a check. I meet so many filmmakers that don't even realize how hard they are bullshitting themselves and other people to try to get a project off the ground. Some of them are fooling themselves as to the marketplace viability of their project. Some are fooling themselves as to how little they can make it for. Some, in rare instances, are seeking too much. Some are doing other things that are detrimental to the project. But I come across so many fallacies and so many bad ideas, and people are either willing to learn or they just want to view me as a cloud of doom and gloom and write me off. And that's fine. In the immortal words of my all-time favorite cinematographer that I've ever worked with, Joe DiGennaro, it's not my movie.
Yeah. Right. That is great.
So I don't suffer if you fail. You suffer, and I'm trying to help you.
All right, Michael. And your information will be in the show notes. So if they want to contact you, they can look into the show notes. And so we'll moving right along to your beautiful works that I first encountered on your Facebook page. And that was all these wonderfully, marvelously crafted artworks. They caught my attention immediately. Please explain to our listeners what special makeup effects entails.
What does special makeup effects entails? Well, so special makeup effects, as I would define it, is anything that we do to either alter an actor, or duplicate an actor. And some of that, I think, on a larger film could be deemed the purview of other departments. Like if we're making a decapitated head or something, or maybe we're making a puppet, or maybe like I'm in talks on a couple of projects to do some old school stop motion puppets, because we deem that sort of the most practical way to go about certain characters in the given project. At the end of the day, that's sort of what I consider special makeup effects. It's not special effects. Special effects is, wind and rain and dust and blowing stuff up and squibs and gunshots and all that kind of stuff. And then visual effects, obviously now, is predominantly digital effects, but used to entail everything from cloud tanks to specialty animation techniques used in live action movies, all kinds of stuff. What we did used to just be referred to as special makeup, and it was pretty much prosthetic work or buildups. And then at a certain point, I want to say during the 70s, the term special makeup effects was coined. I want to say by Tom Berman, who had quite an impressive career. Highly recommend everybody go look him up. Legend has it that he coined that phrase back in the 70s. And prior to that, we were just referred to as makeup artists or special makeup artists.
Okay.
It was really the 70s where the explosion of work happened, and got us to that point in the 80s and 90s, which, saw a lot of the sort of classic things that people tend to associate with this field today. Okay. Before that, I think one of the biggest productions that had been undertaken, you're talking things like The Exorcist, and you're talking things like Planet of the Apes. But prior to that, most movies, our work was a lot more subtle, other than some of the sort of insanely exaggerated alien stuff from like the B movies of the 50s and 60s. It was subtle. You had a lot of like nose prosthetics and stuff, that they're during the 40s and 50s and 60s. You had so many like Dickensian style productions, and we were doing, or Cyrano de Bergerac noses and stuff like that. And I think it was really the heavy expansion point definitely happened in the 70s. It was birthed in the 60s, but the 70s is what changed everything. The 70s is what exploded everybody's association of this craft with horror. It kind of drives me crazy to an extent, because there's so much more. Like, look at a movie like Pirates of the Caribbean or like The Grinch, like the armies of makeup artists on these movies doing phenomenal work. And like, you're just like, oh, Jason and Freddy. I'm like, there's so much more.
Yes. Yeah. Edward Scissorhands. I really enjoyed that one too. It was great work.
Scissorhands was great. I actually have a copy of the life cast that was done on Vincent Price for that movie.
No way.
Mm-hmm.
No way. Wow.
I love that.
Okay. Yeah, that is, I was thinking on The Exorcist. I was kind of had a visual. Of course, anytime The Exorcist is mentioned, you see the face of the head spinning 360.
Yes,
scary
very
as
much
hell.
so.
Scary as hell. And
that was all the work of Dick Smith. Dick Smith is sort of considered the godfather of modern makeup effects.
So was that a prosthetic or?
So a prosthetic, by definition, the easiest way to explain it is false eyelashes are prosthetics. A prosthetic, for the purposes of the film industry, is something that is affixed to a person, typically glued on. So the body that did the 360 head spin was a fully independent, autonomous puppet.
It didn't look like a puppet.
Well, that's Dick Smith for you. I mean, his work is phenomenal. But Dick Smith did, he was very famous for old age makeups. He won the Academy Award for Amadeus,
I remember
which was
that.
long
Great
overdue.
film.
But the old age makeup on F. Murray Abraham, which apparently he had to throw it together really fast. So he developed this process that we still use today of multiple piece prosthetics, as opposed to doing like one giant sort of masky piece. He would break it up into little pieces that went together sort of like a jigsaw puzzle, and it allowed you to make pieces thinner. There were a lot of things from a technical standpoint that it let you do that were just harder with a bigger one piece type thing.
Okay.
And he developed that process and pioneered it. And as a result of that, the old age makeup on Salieri, on F. Murray Abraham, was done that way. But supposedly the forehead prosthetic he sculpted on himself, on a cast of himself, I guess, and I think there were like eye bags were recycled from other makeups. It was thrown together pretty fast. Mm-hmm. Some of his most phenomenal work, in my opinion, was in The Hunger, featuring David Bowie. Bowie goes through this sort of progression of aging and falling apart. The middle stages are my favorite, when he's in like his 60s. Such a great film. It was made in the 80s. Highly, highly, highly recommend if you haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it. I've seen it, but I just don't remember it. I was a bit too young. I think I need to watch it again so I can really appreciate it.
Ghost Story was also really good. Of course, the coolest thing he created for Ghost Story didn't make it into the movie, but you can find images online. It's this, it's like this eyeless, screaming corpse of a ghost. So cool. If you Google it, you'll find them. But that got cut from the film. I think it was deemed too scary or something.
Oh, it's a pity. It was a good film, though. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
I actually watched that for the first time earlier this year. Oh. I'd never made it around to seeing it. Also, Altered States. He did Altered States. Some crazy stuff in that movie. Supposedly, in some of these early films, I believe on The Hunger, it was supposedly the first use of what we call a collapsible core mold. Without wishing to bore everybody who isn't a mold nerd, because a lot of our molds are made of hard materials, we have to accommodate the fact, we have to accommodate undercuts, points where the mold has to reach around something and it could grab when you're trying to open it. And what we do is we take the outer mold, the mold that captures the sculpture detail, called a negative mold, and we'll make that in several pieces that key together. And it allows us to sort of take it off of the interior mold, the core or positive mold, which would be like the copy of somebody's head. It allows us to take it off of that without grabbing anything. A collapsible core is like the inverse. The outside of the mold is one piece, and the core is assembled inside of it like a puzzle. Okay. And that gives the castings you make 0 external seam lines that you have to eliminate.
Brilliant.
It is brilliant. They are extremely difficult and puzzling to make. I know how to make one. I've made like more simple ones for arms, but they are extremely time consuming and as such extremely expensive. So most productions don't use them because it might take you like 9 days to make the core. It's the schedules were allotted half the time, and the budgets, they don't allow for stuff like that. But every once in a while.
Yeah, this is all very interesting. And what interested you most about this sector of the film industry? Because you're really passionate about it.
I have to say, it's kind of funny. It would seem, you meet a lot of people that do what I do, that grew up and at 7 years old, they were playing with latex and were like, I want to be a movie makeup artist. That was not my journey. It was not my journey at all. It was very, very much a different journey. I started out wanting to be an animator. I took animation classes from one of Ralph Bakshi's animators. And if you're not familiar with Ralph Bakshi's work, anybody listening, I trust you are. Check it out. Really, really cool stuff. So I started out animating, and when it was about 17, it was time to sort of pick a college journey. And what I realized is the type of animation that I love, which is hand-drawn animation and to some extent stop motion animation, that wasn't where the industry was going. And I wasn't going to be able to get the kind of work easily that I would want that would make me happy. So pursuing that as a career just didn't seem like the right play. And as a result of that, I had to sort of pivot and pick, your parents are like, pick something. So I found, not too far from where I grew up, was the Art Institute of Philadelphia, which no longer exists. And they had a program in what they call industrial design. And generally speaking, industrial design is products. So, anything that you own that was like manufactured, that isn't like a textile. I'm just like looking at my desk here, so it's like I have this interesting looking twist top bottle that has thumbtacks, or like I've got this desk lamp, or the fob from my car keys. All of that went through the hands of an industrial designer, and to some extent it would also go through the hands of an engineer to make it functional. But a designer's job is to do exactly that. It's to design the product, and then the engineers they fight each other until you get a final product. It always becomes an argument of form versus function. And their program encompassed everything from generalized product design to, I learned old school marker rendering, which is something I still love. I love the look of that versus digital rendering for products. So that's a big one. They had packaging design. They had toy design and environmental design, which was sort of everything from like trade show displays to, I guess would really bleed into like scenic work, if you were to enter the film industry from that side. And as part of that program, they had what I would refer to as, or what they referred to as special effects. And I would say that obviously we've established that's not special effects and what special effects actually is, but that's what they called it, and I didn't know any better back then. So these are all sort of things at the back of my mind in that regard.
What was the first thing you created? Can you remember the first thing you created?
Like just created? Probably
Yes.
Something made out of Play-Doh.
Well, I mean, in terms of your special makeup, can you remember the first?
That would have been in college.
Okay.
It was a Dr. Doom mask. It was a very detailed one. I had, this sort of metallic stuff in the front, but I had over the head, like burnt, warped flesh. No longer have that. And then I went into early prosthetics and things of that nature.
Okay. Oh, I wish you still had it.
No, I don't. I don't have any of that stuff anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, that is. It's a lot. Some of the work that I've seen, I mean, with, wow. I'm thinking about makeup now in a different light. I was thinking about, what came to mind was Maestro with Bradley Cooper, and how real that, I don't know if have you seen Maestro?
I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen a lot of shots of Kazu's work on that.
Okay.
And it's Kazu. I mean, he within our industry is known as like one of the ultimate perfectionists.
Okay. Well, that was perfect. That was perfect, especially when he was aged later.
Yes, it was beautifully done.
Yeah, and I heard it was practical and not CGI'd in. I was like, okay, this is
Bradley insisting on going practical.
It's beautiful.
Made a big point of that.
I don't know much about, I'm trying to think of all the things that kind of really captivated me. Gary Oldman in Bram Stoker's, and also in Darkest Hour.
Well, Darkest Hour was handled by the same artist. It was handled by Kazu, although he didn't do the daily applications.
Okay.
Bram Stoker was handled by Greg Canham, who is in really poor health right now, unfortunately. Greg sort of became famous for his old age work. Although one of the favorite projects that came out of his workshop that I loved was Stephen King's Thinner. Some of the sort of heavy duty weight loss makeups they did in that with the hanging flesh was just so beautiful. Greg did movies like Titanic, Hook, just so many beautiful old age makeups. He did plenty of great creature stuff too. His version of the Frankenstein monster in Van Helsing, I always thought was really cool with the transparent top of the head.
Yes,
such a wild design. The pistons in the leg. I felt, Greg did some phenomenal stuff over the years, and that he's one of only a handful of artists that have won multiple Oscars for makeup. Rick Baker, I think, still holds the record with, I think, either 7 or 8 Academy Awards for makeup. But Rick exists in a league of himself. He's a true Renaissance man. He's probably doing more in his retirement than most of us do professionally. He, I believe, had the largest workshop in the world by square footage, I think. Not 100% on that. But Rick is probably the only person who you could genuinely say not a single less than stellar makeup left that workshop. And it's a really strong claim, because even some of the most famous, like, there's movies you'll watch and be like, I can't believe that's who did the work on this, because it's awful. And you can never say that about Rick's work. And there's only one job he supposedly ever went after. Everything else landed in his lap, which is also very impressive for our industry. He didn't have to bid on things, or there was one project, and that was the remake of The Wolfman. He really, really wanted, and he went to Universal over it, but that's rare in our industry.
Yeah, you're speaking about Freddy Krueger, and it's not all about him, but that he was terrifying. The first time I saw him, he looked really burnt up. And
look back at the pictures. I will say the makeups in the first Nightmare on Elm Street, I'm not a fan of. I'm not going to say who did the work, but by the second movie, they landed in the hands of Kevin Yeager, who's amazing. And he handled them.
They were still scary, though.
They were scary, but the sheer level of improvement from the first to the second movie is just, if you look at them side by side, it's noticeable.
Because you do that, that's your craft.
You know what? I don't even think I've shown it to lay people. Like, I would challenge you to go Google images.
Okay, I will
later. You'll see it. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Like, it just, everything was tightened up, and I feel like the craft, the craftsmanship of it is so much better. And the more well-crafted the makeup, the more I get sucked in, because I feel like I'm just seeing the character and not the makeup.
Okay. Well, I saw the difference between like Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. There was a big disparity in terms of the improvements. So that was, but for Freddy, I guess I've never thought about it. So I'll definitely look into that.
Most people don't, because they watched the movies far enough apart that it doesn't immediately register. But I was looking back at some progressive images, and I was watching the Robert Englund documentary.
Okay.
And I was like, wow, that is really noticeable.
He was still scary, though. That's all I'll say. Oh, my God. But before we wrap up, I have a few more questions, and then we'll be done. Yay! But I may have to have you come back on, because I don't think we're going to get through all of it. I think I had a bit too much. So, but anyways, what is your opinion on the state of practical effects versus computer-generated images? I wanted to know that.
I know this is a point of contention. You will talk to a lot of the guys in their 50s and 60s and 70s and be like, computers stole all our work. I'm like, there's a couple things you got to bear in mind from within the industry that I think are like really, really important. We actually have more work now than we did in the 90s. There are more workshops than existed then. There is mountains more work in TV than we had. Even back in the 90s, you had a handful of shows that were heavy on makeup, and that was it. Now there's makeup effects and prosthetic work in like zillions of shows. That's a really big thing. that I think is absolutely overlooked. And the reason it's overlooked, the reason it feels like people are struggling for work, is because we ended up with a whole bunch of makeup schools, and they just kept multiplying. We've actually lost a bunch since the pandemic, but there was a heavy stretch of time where it was just one after the other, and they're just pumping these people into the industry at a rate that the industry couldn't hope to accommodate. And I think if a bunch more don't open to replace the ones that close, that I think we'll recover that disparity in maybe about 10 years, 15 years. It was definitely worse with the higher volume of schools, but the reality is that it's just there's more people than there is work. And the perfectly balanced time ended probably in the late 90s, very early 2000s, like right before I got into the industry. And that's a very unfortunate yet noticeable thing. There are things that we just will not do practically. And the reality is we can't do everything. You know, there's some movies that never would have been made without the advent of digital technology. You hear Stan Lee used to talk about how, you know, they didn't make the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie until they had the technology to support it. There's just some stuff you can't do practical, you know, in various departments. And that's just like, that's a thing. It's not something you can get around. No matter how much you'd like to argue like digital's bad. It's a tool. You know, sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a screwdriver. So that's very, very important to understand, I think. And once you understand that, you accept that it's a tool. You know, we're not going to be making giant dinosaur puppets again. It's not going to happen. And that's okay. There were never like tons of those jobs. So it's not like, yeah, it was great. It kept people over at Stan Winston's busy for like 2 years. That's wonderful. And that's not going to happen anymore. But we still have loads of creature suit work, actors in monster suits. And we have tons of character prosthetic work and likeness work. You're seeing all these, you know, look at movies like Lee Daniels' The Butler, how many likeness prosthetic makeups they did. It's a terrible example because a lot of those makeups, they did not schedule right. So they had to be created in like 3 days. It was a nightmare schedule for the people working on it. Most of the workshops turned that project down because of the turnaround times the studio was asking for. So that's its own sort of ball of wax in that particular sense. And that sucks. But, you know, there is lots and lots and lots of work. You know, it's just, we need to get to a point where there's few enough people vying for that work. And the average turnaround out of a school to somebody realizing that they just can't hack it in the industry is 2 to 3 years. And that's 2 to 3 years that they are still taking jobs that could have gone and helped somebody else that has better standing. Like, I'm not bitter about, you know, saying I lost a bunch of work to a bunch of makeup students. It's more so like it would just restructure the industry in a better way. If there was some form of an out-of-school assessment tool or something. And let's be fair, you know, these are businesses. These schools are businesses, as with any other sort of trade school. They're typically not going to turn people away. You don't have to audition to go there. It's you know, it's about volume. I mean, I don't begrudge them for that. It's a business. Number one rule of business is stay in business. I don't look at them as evil entities. I have curriculum-based issues. There's things I would like to be different. I feel that the schools flooding the marketplace also created an unfortunate effect whereby it used to be back in the 80s and 90s, because it was hard to find qualified people and people would sort of stay at the same place for a while, that if you wanted to work in one of the workshops, they would train you. You'd come in with some really rudimentary skill set and they would train you. But because of supply and demand now, the burden falls on the artist to be capable. And I think the schools are improving, but they haven't quite bridged the entire gap. So people are still coming out to a certain degree, somewhat unemployable, at least on the workshop side. And there's no reason for me to sit there and train a bunch of people, because the moment that project's done, I can't keep them employed all year. They're going to go work for somebody else. And I was their school for free. So that's its own issue. But I don't have animosity towards digital. I don't think digital killed my industry. I think that AI is a viable concern. And the unions are fighting that. I also don't think AI is at a place where it's quite nailed everything. I think it's a good 15 to 20 years away from really being that like science fiction movie level ability level. Like you get AI images now and like people have like 8 fingers and shit.
Yes.
I read an interview with an art director, and he was talking about how the studio wanted him to use AI instead of a normal prep team to go through all the various design work. So he was asking, they had a bunch of programmers come in, and he'd be like, tell him what he wanted, and they'd give him stuff, and he'd be like, make these changes. And they couldn't fully make the changes because you can't control the AI. You just keep prompting it, hoping to get what you want. And that's great if you don't entirely know what you want.
Right.
But what he really wanted were a bunch of Photoshop artists to just sit there and make him stuff. And the AI couldn't bridge that gap, and it ended up being a bunch of wasted time and money. Yeah, that's going to change. I don't think it's going to change in the next 5 years. I think that there's always going to be a love of practical stuff. There was this huge boom of we'll just do everything CG on the low budget side a number of years ago. And what I've discovered is I meet more and more directors that want practical, whether it's practical explosions, whether it's practical makeup, whether it's practical something else. They don't want to default to digital.
I don't blame them. Sometimes for the layman, it's hard to tell the difference, but there's still a quality that is different.
So you can tell certain really, really, really hard things to do digitally are realistic hair incorporating movement. But the big thing with digital modeling is anything inserted after the fact has to, the way light hits it has to match everything else in the scene, like all the people and the objects in the scene. And that is, doing it right is very time consuming. So if you're not throwing zillions of dollars at it, you'll see it. You can spot bad CG. You can totally spot it. It's still definitely more prevalent in TV than in film. I definitely think some of the digital de-aging work, there's really only one company out there that does amazing digital de-aging work, and that's Lola. Everybody else, it still seems a little stiff. I know that there's a big joke about they did some pickup shots with Henry Cavill as Superman in the Justice League movie, and he had grown his mustache for what was that spy movie he did? I forget. So they had to digitally remove his mustache because he couldn't shave it, and like his upper lip looks really stiff in those scenes.
My goodness, yeah,
it's noticeable. It's definitely noticeable. It's not as bad as people say it is, but it's noticeable. So there's even if you look at a bunch of deep fakes, like half the deep fakes I've seen aren't as impressive as people make it out to be. And like the reality is, using AI to do a lot of that stuff goes back to the problem that art director has. You can't control it the way you can control CG.
Right.
It's still a little tricky, and it is what it sounds like. It's artificial intelligence. To a certain point, you're never going to be able to fully control it. But what I've noticed, from a cost standpoint, oftentimes practical is cheaper than digital on certain things. There's this belief that digital's cheaper. Digital's cheaper if you're making like $100 million movie, and you've got 1,000-person crew all making $700 to $1,200 a day. Yes, if you can shave shooting days by doing stuff digitally, it's going to save you a fortune.
Okay.
But when you're making like a $1 million movie or a $10 million movie or whatever, that dynamic is different.
Mm.
So just dumping everything off on post-production isn't necessarily cost effective. And certain people have figured that out. It's also the other actors in the scene like to interact with something tangible rather than like a tennis ball. A green tennis ball
Mm-hmm.
is a big thing. Like there's so many reasons to do things practically. The other thing I will say is, when you're doing things like exploding heads or, tossing a decapitated head through the air, like the laws of physics that govern that, it is so much easier to get that shot practically than to try to duplicate weight and mass moving through air and stuff digitally and hope that it's right. Because if you don't nail it, you get that uncanny valley thing. I'm all for for lack of a better word, the most practical way to get the shot. If that means using an in-camera effect, or if that means doing it digitally, or if that means doing something else, then that's the way you should do it. At the end of the day, it should be cost and manufacturing methodology effective, because that's what's responsible to whoever's paying for the movie.
Yeah.
Digital's the answer. Digital's the answer. I'm not going to tell you to use a wrench as a hammer when you could just use a hammer, because that's just dumb. That's why hammers exist.
Makes sense to me. Makes sense. I'm looking forward to that Beetlejuice movie, by the way. The
I
sequel.
am also. Obviously, Jeffrey Jones isn't going to be in it for, I assume everybody knows why.
They may and they may not. All right. So what's the best advice you've received pertaining to your craft?
That's hard. It kind of depends on, if you're asking about the business side of it or the craft side of it. I mean, good
Either
advice. I think the business side is where a lot of people are lacking. Like I literally teach a class on the business side of the industry, on all of the stuff that the schools don't cover that just isn't self-evident. So I think that the best advice I ever got or would give is learn the business side. Other than that, I mean, be aware of your own abilities. I know what I'm not good at, and I hire people for that. You should be able to look at your own work fairly. You should be able to assess what your strengths and weaknesses are. It's really hard in today's educational system where people are afraid to give just soul-crushing critiques. I think that artists have benefited from that kind of critique for centuries, if not millennia. And we've lost that. And that sucks. It doesn't put you in the best position of understanding where you stand. And if you don't know where you stand, you can't improve.
Yes.
So I think it's really important to know where you stand.
Wow. It's amazing. And what would your dream project be? What would a dream project for Mr. Michael Dinetz be?
Honestly, something like Pirates of the Caribbean.
Okay. And why?
Just a large volume of character makeups, being able to hire a lot of people and just to really fill out a scene with cool stuff. That's one. A movie like Predators would be another one. Just a whole bunch of fun, wild creature suits. There's a world in which some sort of a historical drama that requires a ton of likeness makeups would be cool. The hard part with that is you're at the mercy of how much they're willing to hear what you have to say when it comes to casting. Like you can't cast Jack Black as like John Lennon. It's not going to work. But it wouldn't be the first time somebody at a studio was like, you'll figure it out.
How?
Like, I remember they made it work, but this is a little bit different. I remember in Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes, Rick Baker kept telling the studio, nobody with large noses. And General Thade, they cast Tim Roth, who has a giant nose. Now, that makeup on Thade looks amazing. They made it work, but, there's always a limit. There's a limit, and you want to put yourself in a position to not have to face that limit and find out what it is. And you definitely don't want to land on the wrong side of it, because then everybody's mad at you.
Wow.
So that would be a big caveat with a historical piece. You need a lot of cooperation from the casting department as to, who can, who could feasibly be whoever the person in question is, even if they need a little help. Like Leonard Bernstein, you had Bradley Cooper was an okay canvas for that, but like Danny DeVito would not be.
Understood. Yeah, I get you. Well, Michael, I've learned so much from you. I hope everyone else has as well. And I truly appreciate you sharing this virtual space with us. All the very, very best to you and everything you put your hands to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Journaling with PT podcast and my conversation with special makeup effects artist, Mr. Michael Dinetz, whose birthday is June 1st, 2024. So his information is in the show notes if you want to give a birthday shout out. Thank you so much for listening in. Thank you for all of your support. Please subscribe to the podcast. And do, as always, stay tuned.